So now that we have created our layout, we can start creating the functionality for equipping our items. And to do that, we actually need to add a new script. As I told you in the beginning, I'm gonna have some shoulders and belts and so on, different kinds of items in my game. And if you want to add new items, of course, you need to go to your item script, go to the public enumeration item type, and then you need to add the extra things. For example, I forgot to add shoulders and belt in my last tutorial, so I had to add them down here so that we can actually pick up shoulders and belt. And what I've done is that I have added all the sprites I need inside my asset folder, sorry, not asset folder, inside my resource folder. All the sprites I need for my weapons and armor. And inside my streaming assets, of course, I have added every single item that I need in my game. So now that we have our layout, we would like to be able to equip some items and such. Right now, you can see that you can always change the size of this by taking cell size and setting it to, for example, 10 by 10 or something to make it smaller, and 20 by 20 to make it larger, and so on. So you can always change it if you don't want it as small as this, or larger if you want larger. So right now we need to create the new script, because as I might have mentioned earlier, is that we don't need to add the inventory script here. We need to add some other functionality to it. And to do that, we need to create a new script. So if we go into our inventory scripts, and then we right click, create script, and a C# script. And we are gonna call this script character panel. So this is our character panel script. So if we double click on it to open it up, then you can see that it already inherits from mono behavior. But the character panel needs a lot of the same functionality as our inventory script has. So because of that, we need to inherit from inventory script, because, for example, our inventory script has the functionality for example, hiding in the tooltip, showing the tooltip, moving items around, saving the inventory, loading the inventory, and so on. And we also want all that functionality inside our character panel. So instead of rewriting all the code that we need, we can simply just say that we inherit from inventory instead. So now that we inherit from inventory, we can actually use all the functionality inside the inventory script from a character panel object as well. So if we save this and we would add this character panel script to the character panel here, see, we don't have anything here, nope. So if we take the script here and drag it onto our character panel, you'll see that it pops up down here. And even though our character panel doesn't have any functionality inside it, you'll see that it has a lot of public variables. It had rows and slots and empty slots, slot padding left and top, and so on, and it also has slot size and fade time. So basically the only variable we would need here is the fade time inside our character panel, because we need to be able to open and close our inventory, which is the fade time is used there, but we don't need to set the rows and slots and everything, because we already did all this here inside our character panel, inside our editor here. So we wouldn't need all these variables. So we could argue that we should make another script and move everything we don't need in the character panel up there, and then make our inventory inherit from that script, and so on. Or basically the easy way would put all the shared functionality between inventory and character script would be moved to a third script, which character panel and inventory panel would inherit from, and then we can add all the functionality that inventory only needs inside the inventory script, and all the functionality that character panel only needs inside the character panel script. I'm not going to do that right now. Maybe we can do it later to make it easier, because it's not going to be in the way of us right now. But I just want to say that we're not going to use all these fields here, and they're basically useless right now, so maybe we're going to move them later. For now, just put the fade time on 1 or something. So if we go to our inventory, we'll see that we have some different functions here. We have create layout, for example, and right now we're not using create layout for anything in our in our character panel, so we might remove that later. But right now, let's just focus on the functionality we actually need inside the character panel. One more thing I actually just remembered. When we click here, you'll see that there's this empty slots, and we never need that. We used that earlier for debugging to check when we were fixing those bugs. So we need to go into our inventory and go all the way to the top, and we need to find empty slots here, and we need to make this one private again and save, because we don't want to make it visible for everything. And then you can see it should disappear out here in a few seconds. And there we go. So now empty slots is gone because we don't need it. And notice that I removed it inside inventory, and I'm able to see the change inside character panel because it inherits from inventory. So let's go back to the character panel. So first of all, we need to have a collection of all the equipment slots we have, because it's nice to have a collection like an array or something where we can reach into to get all these slots we actually need. It's going to make it faster later when we're going to access these slots, so we don't have to get find child in component and blah 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 and so on. So it's going to be easier for us just to look through the array. So first of all, we're going to make a public slot, and we're going to call this equipment slots like this. So this array here is actually going to contain every single slot that has a which is fit for a character to put some equipment. So you can see how, sorry, it's running in the background here. If we look here, we will see that our head slot, our neck slot, and shoulder slot, and so on, should be put into that array here. So we're actually going to have an array out here that should contain every single object that we have. As we look here, it should pop up soon. Here is equipment slot, and this one will be made larger by itself, and then all the slots will be equipped here. I'm just going to put it as 0 as standard, because we're going to set it from the script. Okay, so this is our equipment slots, and we need to fill this one out, and we can basically do that inside awake. So I'm going to make public, just write void awake, and inside awake we are going to say equipment slots equals transform to access the transform on this character panel. And inside the transform we can get access to all the child objects, so we can say transform that get component in components in children, that get components in children. There we go, components in children, and then slot. There we go. And it's very important that you use get components with an S, so to get all the slots components, because else you're going to have an error here. So it's going to find all the slots and return it to this array here. So let's save, jump into our game, and let's try to play. Then you'll see that all the slots, like all the children with a slot component on them, has been added to this this array here, so that we can easily access. So we know whenever I need to access the head, I can access element 0 to get the head, for example. Or if I need to get the boots, then I can access element 8 to get the boot slot, for example. So this makes it a little easier, and it should also be cheaper in the long run to access all these all the time. Okay, so let's try to equip some items. If we jump out here, you'll see that we'll get an error when we try to equip an item. So if I pick up a random item and I would take it and try to place it anywhere here, we'll get this exception that says there's no canvas group attached to the char panel. And the reason of that is because usually when we equip our items, when we do like this, move them around, we are checking if the alpha on the canvas group is larger than 0, because I don't want to be able to put it inside an inventory that isn't visible. For example, I shouldn't be able to take an item and put it here now, because this one is not visible, and that's why we're using the canvas group. But if we compare our inventory to our char panel, you'll see that our inventory, which has all the slots sitting under it like this has a canvas group attached to it right here, but our character panel doesn't have a canvas group on it, as you can see, but its parent has a canvas group on it, and the reason of that is because we want to be able to add the stats window as well, and the stat window should also be invisible when we turn down this. So to fix that, we need to make an exception inside our move item function, or at least we need to make an if statement. So if you go to inventory and we go to the move item function inside the inventory, then we need to check if the slot we just clicked has the slot's parent we just clicked has a canvas group on it before we start to look for the alpha, because right now this line of code here is giving us some problems because we're saying click the transform the parent get component canvas group, and if the alpha is larger than 0. So if our component parent doesn't have an alpha or a canvas group on it, this one is going to return null and give us an exception. So to fix this, we can make a canvas group here, and we can call it which is C, of course. So get the class name CG, and it's equal to clicked.get.transform the parent.get component canvas group. So we could do this in a one-liner down here. I just like to split it up so that it's easier for you guys to see what I'm doing. So right now, when we click an object, we are checking, well, does this clicked object have a parent? And does this parent have a canvas group on it? If the parent has a canvas group on it, then we're going to save it in here. If the parent doesn't have a canvas group on it, this CG is going to be equal to null like this. This is what happens when we click our character panel. So we can say, well, if CG isn't null, well, then we have a canvas group on our parent, which means that we have just clicked a slot inside our inventory like this, and we have clicked the slot here in our inventory, and it checks, well, the parent, does it have a canvas group on it? It does. And after that, it's going to check, well, does that canvas, or does that CG, that alpha, is that larger than 0? CG here. Okay, so now we're checking if it's null before we check the alpha to make sure we don't get that exception. So let's try to save and see what happens now. We have saved, we play our game again. See if we get the exception. Let's try to take a sword when we're going to try to put it. So now it just disappears because we don't equip it anywhere. But as you can see, we don't give the same exception. Let's try again. As you can see here, the exception doesn't appear. We just drop it on the ground instead. So we need to add some more functionality, but we don't have the same problem where the game would freeze or give us an exception the same way as before. We get this red error message down here. So that was one of the things that would make a problem. So if this isn't true, if our parent doesn't have a canvas on it, then we need to say, well, clicked.transform parent.get component canvas group .alpha larger than 0. So what does this mean? Well, if we jump out here, you'll see that we are clicking on a head item, for example. So we just clicked on this head. Then we're going to check, well, is my parent, which is the char panel holder, does that one have a canvas group on it? So instead of just clicking on the immediate parent to check if we have a canvas group, well, then we go to the parent to check if we have a canvas group. So now we're actually sure to get in here if we are clicking on an item or a slot inside our canvas character panel. Take these and put them here. As you can see, we can put anything in here now, but we're actually able to move stuff into it, and we can put a mana potion inside it, and we can put like a chest here, and we can put an axe as the offhand, and a mana potion down here, and so on. So right now we can equip stuff randomly, but we need to be able to differ between different items and only be able to put the items inside the correct slots. So to be able to put these items in the correct slot, we need to know which kind of items each slot can contain. So all the slots inside a normal inventory should be able to contain all items we have in our game, and all slots, for example, a head slot here should only be able to contain a head item, for example. So we need to add some functionality to that. So later we are going to be able to click on an item and move it by mouse, like this, pick up an item here and move it by mouse to the correct slot. And we also need to be able to pick up an item, right click on it, and then it will be equipped to the correct slot in here. So first of all, I want to make the functionality that can make sure that you right click on an item and it gets equipped in the correct slot here. And then later we are going to take the functionality where we can actually pick up an item and only put it in the correct slot in here, for example. So let's open up our slot here, and we need to add a new field so that we know what kind of items each slot can contain. So under the canvas group of the slot, here we can make a public item type, and we're going to call it can contain. And this one will indicate what kind of item the slot can contain, so we can compare this to the actual item type of the object when we want to equip it. So if I want to equip some shoulders, I can try to put it in a slot, and that slot should know if it can contain the shoulders or not. So we need to add some functionality to the item type. So if we just right click on it and go to definition or go to the item script, then we can see the item type up here. As you can see, we have some other types of items. We have boots, stringed shoulders, and belt, and so on. But we don't have any value for slots that can contain anything, because right now I can contain consumables, main hand, two hand, and so forth. But I need to be able to contain all kinds of things. So after build, make a comma and write generic. And all slots that are marked as generic will be able to contain all kinds of items. And one more thing we need to do is that our weapon slot down here, the first slot, should be able to contain all kinds of weapons, but it's only allowed to contain a two-hander if this one over here is empty. So instead of just having all our weapons being equipped as two-handers or main hands, then we need to add one more thing. We need to add a type called generic weapon, and this type will be added so that we can take our main hands and two hands and equip them on a slot called generic weapon. So they're different kinds of items, different kind of type, but they both go in the generic weapon slot. Save this. If we open up here, let's try. And then we should go to our prefab and slot prefab. So right now the can contain is set to consumable, and that's not good because then they can only contain consumable items. So the can contain should be set to generic as standard. So all items or all slots we're making in our inventories goes for generic. Then we need to set up all the other parts here. And remember to save your scene if you would crash later, so you don't have to set all this up again. Head, for example, needs to click and select the head. The neck needs to click and select neck. And shoulders, click and select the shoulders. And belt and so on. So select the correct types on all your items here. And if you're missing some, then you can just add them by yourself in there. Do I have braces? And boots. And then the weapons. see, we have a main hand here, and we have an offhand, and then we have a trinket in the end. Okay, so now I have a type on every single slot so that I know what I can contain in them. So that's made here. So now we need to add a new function. And this function should be inside our character panel, and we need to make it under update and all. Basically, as we move start and update, we don't need them right now. And we're going to make public void equip item. And this function is going to equip an item to our character panel on the correct slot. So it's going to take a slot, the slot that we need to equip it to, and an item script item, and the item we want to equip to the current slot we want to equip it to. And for now we are just going to add the functionality so that we can right click on an item and swap it out with an item, or we can right click on the item inside our inventory and put it inside our character panel. So basically we need to say slot dot swap items, and we are going to swap. Let's say we have our inventory open right now in our game. I don't know if I can run it. Yeah, I can. So we have our inventory open, and we have this item here, and I right click on it. So we're going to swap these pants with the empty slot in here, right? So the pants goes in the slot here, and the empty slot gets moved here, so we have an empty slot in our inventory and a filled up slot inside our character panel on the right spot. So we are going to say slot.swap items, and we are going to say we're going to swap the slot, the one we just clicked inside our inventory by right clicking on it, and we are going to swap it with the correct item, the correct slot inside our slots equipment slot here. So we're going to find the slot that can contain the same type of item as this slot is giving. So this is the item script, right? And we're going to find the slot inside here that can contain the correct item that we just right clicked on. So we are going to say array, and if you don't have that, then you can right click, go to resolve, and include the namespace using system. And up here it's gonna include using system. And if you can't do that, then just write using system up here. So we're going to say array.find to find the correct object. We're gonna find an object inside our equipment slots, and this is basically a for each loop that runs it through that runs through our equipment slots array and finds the correct item. But this is just a shorter form of it. So we're going to look through our equipment slots, and every time we find an item or a slot inside equipment slots, we're going to call it X, and we're going to look into X by using this lambda expression. So if X.can contain, if X can contain that slot, so now we're looking, every time we look at one of these, boom, 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 all these, we call it X. And if X can contain, this item we just clicked on, item type, so this item scripts items item type, well, then we're simply gonna swap them. So we're gonna find the correct item and swap it with the slot. So what happened is that we have the pants, and we right click on them, and they're gonna get moved to the empty slot, and the empty slot is gonna get moved into the inventory. Right now we are focusing on equipping our items, and we right click on them, and when we right click on a slot, it will actually call the use function on an item, if you remember that from earlier. So if I go to my equipment script, you will see that it has this function it's overriding called use, and this use function is actually going to equip our equipment. But this use function is actually dictated, the structure of it is dictated from the item it's inheriting from. So we need to go to item instead, and in here we'll see that we have this not item here, give me one sec, here we have this use function here that is abstract, that all our item types are inheriting, and they need to implement their own version of this. So we need to add something to this one, because when we right click on an item, we need to know which slot we came from, and we need to know what item is inside that slot. So that I can right click on the pants, and I can take that slot and swap it with the slot inside my character panel, and I can use that item and put it over there. So we need to tell this use function that it needs a slot called slot, and it also needs an item script called item. So if I build now, it should actually start to complain a lot of places. There we go. So it complains about all these inherited classes here, all these classes that inherit from item, that they don't implement the correct version of use. So I need to write here slot and item script. I'll just call it item. I can actually just copy this one and then paste it the other places where it's complaining about it. Also inside equipment. And if I rebuild, let's see what I have left of errors. Okay. And here also have the same mistake inside my weapon. Let's rebuild. Okay. So here I'm trying to use my item inside my item script, and now I need to use it so that I'm using the new type of use here. So I need to tell this use function that I'm giving in the slot. And that slot should come from use here. Giving the slot here. And the use item function also needs to have an item with it, and that's basically just, if I move this breakpoint here, this. So now when we try to right click on an item and use it, it's basically going to send in the slot that we just clicked on, and it's going to send in the item that we have the item script on that slot, so that we can actually use this when we need to swap our stuff around. So now it complains that no overload method for use takes 0 arguments, because I just changed this use as well. If we double click on that, we will get into our what's called our slot. So when we right click on a slot out here in our game, okay, I can't play it now because I have that error, but if I would right click on one of these slots here, or inside my inventory right click, then this function here is called, and it checks, well, is the slot I just right click on empty? No, it's not. Well, then it wants to pop the item on the slot, and it's going to use it. And right now it's asking me for giving a slot in when I use it, so I know what slot I just clicked there in. So I'm just going to give this with it. So right now, when I would right click on it, it will tell that this, it will pop the slot and it will use it. So this functionality for popping here is going to give us some problems later. I'll show that in a few minutes. But for now, let's just leave it with this, because I would like to show you why we don't pop it later. So now we need to call the function called equip item. And if we go to our character panel, we created this new function called equip item earlier, and we need to call that whenever we right click on one of our slots. So the slot we right click on needs to tell equip item what slot we clicked on, and it needs to tell equip item what kind of item we are going to swap around. And that's exactly why we did all this overriding here, where we give it in a slot and we get it in an item script. And the same goes for what we just did in here. We are telling this items here that it needs to use this, so that we can actually item.use, give in the slot and give in this, so that we can use equip item inside our character panel. So let's start with our equipment. In here, I need to be able to use my character panel's function that's called equip item. And the easiest way to get an access to that is to create a singleton. So I'm gonna make a private static a character panel called instance. I'm going to create a property to access this, and I can right click on instance, click refactor and encapsulate field, click OK, and it's named instance 1. So the reason that it names it as instance 1 instead of instance is because inside our inventory here, which our character panel inherits from, we already have a what is it called, a property for accessing the singleton. I think we have an instance here. I can try to delete, because I don't think we're using this anymore, so I can try to delete this and see if there comes up any errors, and then go to collections and see what happens if I delete this. See if we're gonna have some errors. Oops, need to get the whole thing. See if we have some errors. Rebuild. Nope. Okay, so I could easily delete that singleton I had in my inventory because we're not using that anymore. That's like something we left for like one of the earlier parts of this tutorial. So now I don't have any problems with creating character panel instance here, because before we inherit from inventory, and inventory already had this one instance in it. It named it instance 1, and I'm not interested in that. So we're gonna make our usual structure here. For a singleton, so if GameObject dot find object of sorry, not like this, if instance, of course, equals null. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to say instance equals GameObject dot find of object of type character panel, and then we're going to return the instance. Okay. So now we just made that singleton, and I think I've explained this lots of times throughout this tutorial series, that a singleton is just a way of accessing a class easier on the class level, and it's also a way of making sure there's only one in our scene at one time. What were we doing? We were down here, equipment, and we need to call equipment equipped item from our equipment. So now, instead of saying debug.log equipped item, we can actually use this for something. We can say character panel.instance.equip item, and we need to tell, well, what slot it is, and we need to tell it the item script we should swap. So let's save this and try to go to our game. And remember, I only did this on the slot right now, or on the equipment right now, so we need to do the exact same thing on our weapon, and we need to do the exact same thing on our, not consumables because we don't want to use them, but our weapon we also need to do it. Okay, so right now you can see that there is some problems with divided by 0 exception, and the reason of that is because we have our character panel here, and in our character panel we have a lot of different options here where we have put everything to 0, and because it's 0, then at some point inside our inventory script here, inside, let's see if I can find it, inside our create layout, maybe I should just search for it, there we go, we are going to divide something. We're going to say slots divided by rows, and 0 divided by 0 is not very good to do, and because we're doing that is because that our character panel inherits from inventory, and it already calls this function here, which we are not even using inside our character panel. So we might as well just override it. So go to your inventory and find the create layout function. If you haven't done it already, then write virtual here. So it's public virtual void create layout. And the reason that we made it virtual is because we want to override it inside our character panel. So if make public virtual void, we can go to our character panel, and because our character panel inherits from inventory, we are allowed to do public override create layout here. And base.layout actually calls the layout function in here inside our inventory superclass, so we're not interested in that. We're just gonna do like this. So this is not best practice at all right now, because usually we would not want to override a function unless we need to do something in it. But now, right now, we can just override it and not write anything. And later we can take care of this if we want to clean up. So just override it and save. And now you should be able to run your game without getting a divided by 0 exception. And as you can see, the exception should come. Let's try run our game one more time. And you can see there's no exception now. So I need to show you one more thing. If I save here and open up, it's just me pressing wrong buttons here. If I try to pick up some items here, we should get an exception when we right click here. As you can see, I get an exception when I right click on my item here to equip it here. And the reason that I get this exception is because that of that pop thing I showed you before. So if we go to, was it inside slot? And we have items pop here, this is fine. It's inside our use function somewhere, here we go. So inside use item, that we are saying item.pop.use this. And when we pop the item, we actually remove it from our inventory, which means that we pick up something and we want to equip it, so we right click here, but we remove it. So later when we want to take this item and put over here, it's already removed from our inventory and we are not allowed to switch those places. So basically we can go here and we can say items.pop, we can say items.peek, so we only take a look inside and use the item. And when we do that, then later we're going to remove it. So let's just save this and let's close this. So let's jump back into Unity and test if it works and see if we have some other things we need to fix. Open up the inventory and pick up some things. Let's get an equipment. We have a shoulder piece here. Just clear the console to see what is happening. Right click and we get another exception. Let's see. This exception is an inventory script slot script 276. So if we go into the slot script here and go to line 276. Yeah, okay. So here I'm using inventory manager that instanced 2.items, and I should use this one instead. So I can copy this one and replace inventory manager, and the same goes down here. And here replace that inventory manager with 2, so we use the 2 local variables here instead of using the inventory manager instance. And the same goes here. Here I should just use from.items. There we go. So let's save again and give it one more try to see if this helped out. So let's try to pick up some items. We have a pair of pants. If I right click on them, it actually equipped. So now it actually goes to the right places. I haven't done it with my weapons yet, but I can right click on my items to equip them in the right slot right now. Try to drop these items away. See if we can get something else just for fun. Belt and some braces. So as you can see, it equips the items inside our character panel now. So I think I'm gonna wrap this part, and in the next part we're going to look at how we can actually move the items by clicking on an item and clicking on the correct slot. Or actually, give me one sec before we actually wrap this part. Let's do the exact same thing from our weapons. Let's see, we have this use function. We just go to our equipment and copy this character panel thing and paste it here. And let's save and go back into Unity, play our game, and let's see, we have our weapons. So there's an error here from slot to slot. Let's see what happens if I click the other one, and I can equip that one. So we have some problems with our two-handed, of course, because we haven't changed that yet, because our main hand here is set to a main hand, so we haven't put it as a generic weapon, and we haven't taken care of that yet. We're going to do that in the next part, but right now we can equip our main hand weapon, but later we need to be able to equip both weapons. So again, let's wrap this and then look at how we can fix the weapons and how we can actually click on our items and equip them in the right slots.